All right, we will begin the next work session dealing with the budget, but Ms. Hines has an update on meals tax. Okay, just very quickly. Karen Garza, Sandy, and I last Friday met with Sharon Bulova and Ed Long just to start brainstorming about our June joint board retreat. And so we made some progress on that, which is good, and we'll get back to everybody on that very soon. But while we were sitting there, we started talking about the meals tax. So just in case anybody was wondering, this is basically where the Board of Supervisors is now on that. They did put it in their budget guidance, the Board of Supervisors. So as we know, they're planning to talk about it and hopefully put it on the ballot in November. They have, it is on their agenda for tomorrow at 1 p.m. in their meeting rooms, 9 and 10. And I know a lot of advocates are planning to show up. I will be there, and anybody else. It's not an opportunity to speak, but it's an opportunity to listen and watch and find out more. It looks like tomorrow will be an opportunity for that board to get some consensus on are they going to support it, and also basically what will it look like, how much for what reasons, right? So they're looking at different percentages for schools and different percentages for other things, and that will be the conversation tomorrow.
And they have posted the documentation on their website. So if you go to fairfaxcounty.gov/DMB, the very top link says board budget committees. And if you click on the very top one, May 3rd shows up, and you'll find all the documents.
Okay.
Are the documents the same? They had two different options. Okay.
So I'll email everyone the link.
Great, thank you. So you'll forward that. I think when you look at it, what you'll probably see is the two different options they're going to have on the table tomorrow. Both are about 50% for schools and then 50% for other things. It's my sense that they're probably going to go considerably higher for schools, but they're going to have a conversation tomorrow to talk about that. And so if they get consensus tomorrow, if they don't get consensus tomorrow, they have another meeting a week later where they're going to talk about it again. And once they do get consensus, I can send this, in fact, it's probably in the packet, sort of the timeline for this. But the basic timeline going forward would be sometime between June 7th and June 26th, they will have to adopt the resolution setting forth the ballot question and directing the county attorney to file a petition with the circuit court. So that has to happen by the end of June. In June or July, the county attorney will file with the circuit court. August 19 is the deadline for the circuit court to order the referendum beyond the November 8 ballot. November 8th is election day. And then January and February of 2017, next January and February, the Board of Supervisors will have a public hearing and actually adopt the meals tax, right? Because I think what the referendum does, it just gives them the authority to do that. So then they actually have to do that the following winter, next winter. And then the meals tax, assuming they pass one, will take effect July 1, 2017. That would be the effective date. Does that sound right?
Yes, the timeline is in the memo, and it is on page 15.
Okay, thank you. So
I was going to also say, I think in their documents, it also shows their estimate for how much it is estimated it will generate on an annual basis, and it's much higher than I had originally thought. I believe it was 98 million, 96.
hey, Megan McLaughlin, you had a question?
Just a quick comment. Supervisor Cook and I were at an event in Braddock on Saturday, and he also put it in his Cook advisory to the community that he keeps speaking about May 10th for the supervisors. So I just want to kind of get a little bit of clarity about tomorrow versus a week from, because he's really promoting that it's the 10th that they're going to have this conversation.
Well, I think they have, and I'm going by conversations I've had with a couple of people on that board. So I think they have some internal conversations and politics they have to work out. But my understanding from tomorrow's a work session. They have another one on May 10th. So
yeah, that's what his wording is, in committee. So I don't know which committees. What it might be is it might be two different committees are going to be discussing it. So maybe the committee meeting on the 3rd, and then whatever the committee's on the 10th.
We can get some clarity on that. And get it
My understanding is they will start the conversation tomorrow, and they have the 10th in case they need a second meeting to finish the conversation.
But let's make sure.
Yeah.
We'll get some clarity on that. Mr.
Yeah,
Moon?
I had conversation with Mount Vernon District Supervisor. I mean, I didn't have a good feel about that this being done with by tomorrow.
Okay, well, we'll see. That's kind of their problem, but I had a little bit, but so we'll find out more tomorrow, anybody who wants to come. Yeah, Megan?
I will say that Supervisor Cook, he seemed to feel that there was strong support among the supervisors to see this on the referendum, and was emphasizing to me that as a board, we want to really start thinking about how we would want to, from an FCPS school board perspective, what should happen with that meals tax, and then how we would, again, partner with the supervisors. But he gave a pretty good indication that he was sort of seeing a 50-50, county services, schools beneficiary from it, not just, we'll just make this goes to schools and then have less from the transfer. So we're going to have a lot, obviously, to talk about once we can get supervisor support for the referendum, is my sense, correct?
Right, and I think that kind of reading tea leaves now about where they are, but I think they're going to start at 50% for schools, but from talking to various supervisors, I think they're going to end up higher than that, and that John Cook is probably in the minority on that right now, but we'll see what they say. And then once we get to the point where they have done their work, then the school board could have a resolution as well supporting it. I think is how we would do it.
Well, in fairness to John Cook, he was indicating something that would look similar to our traditional transfer portion. So he was saying, 52, 53%. So I think he saw that mirror.
The challenge is, of course, you want the language to be whatever the most people will support. You want it to pass. So what motivates people to vote for it is really where you want to be, I think. Mr. Moon?
Just for you, I had a talk with another supervisor. I didn't get that feeling of 50-50. It was higher than that.
I think also the challenge is moving forward, not having that money supplant the current commitments, because if we have to really work with our community, you all have to work with our advocates to help get this passed potentially, just to find out that it just takes the place of funding we already. It doesn't improve the situation we find ourselves in. That would be really unfortunate.
Ms. McLaughlin had one last question. We need to go on.
Well, I just, because I want us all to really be thinking about it, Dr. Garza, I had that same concern. And so one of the things I said to my supervisor is, it's like anything else. If we determine as a county that traditionally the schools need about 52 to 53% of the revenue, then whether it's the, property tax revenue, whether it's a meals tax revenue, that is something that I think we need to be really working for in the long term, because this notion of, I think we'll give you 3% this year. I think we'll give you 2% this year. Based on what? We're better off if they understand we typically require 53% of the operations of this county, given our size and the number of employees we have. And I know that you don't want to be staying hard and fast, but it is certainly better than going at 3% and 2% that we were finding ourselves at.
Well, and I think also when you talk about supplement and supplant, those are conversations we'll have to have down the road. But I think that a major argument for the meals tax is really that it diversifies and stabilizes the revenue base for the county, and that in itself is an important goal. So
Most counties have been successful with it, found that as long as they were very clear about where their money was going to go. And those have I think, more success are those that have had strong commitment for schools, largely, I think.
Okay, thank you. All right, so tonight we will take, again, another look at how we might now finish off our decisions on the budget. We will have a presentation and more suggestions of how we can balance it. And again, I'd call your attention to the calendar, that the approved budget will be on the agenda for new business on March 12th. May 12th. There will be a public hearing on May 17th. We will have another work session on May 19th, and we will have a final decision on May 26th. So we will be working with that. And again, just to remind you where we left off in February, the advertised budget called for full funding of everything that was in the budget. So that's sort of where we will begin our discussion. So, Ms. Quinn, Ms. Michael, if you would like to.
Before you move off of
sure.
that, Kristen, I also want to point out, we have yet another work session on this on Monday, on the 9th.
Yes, we do.
We have a few, just because of the way the timing worked, we have more work sessions, it seemed like. So we do have yet another one that's
Right.
coming a week from today.
Right.
So it'll be yet another opportunity to discuss
So
it.
lots of opportunities for people to ask questions, to make sure that you are comfortable and that we end up with the best decisions to benefit our children. So, Ms. Michael, Ms. Quinn.
Thank you. In the interest of time, I'm going to go quickly through the slides that I presented previously. So if we look at slide 2, this gives us an update on the impact of the final county and state budget. Once both of those are taken into account, we had a gap of $15.7 million that we discussed previously. So when we looked at our last work session, what we did is we talked about what adjustments were required or which would we need to make, and then after that, which potential actions could we take to balance the budget. So the last time in terms of the required adjustments, we discussed increasing the tuition bill to Fairfax City based on our final total budget increase, making the spring adjustments for enrollment and demographic changes, adjusting our health insurance, reducing the amount that we're budgeting for fuel and set aside funding one time at year end to create a reserve. And all of those required adjustments totaled $6.3 million. So after we made those adjustments, we're facing a gap of $9.4 million. Okay. So last time, the things that we recommended first, we're using one-time funding from FY15 year end. So when we look at that one-time funding that was set aside, we had not allocated that funding as part of our third quarter budget review when that funding was there. Now, we had set aside funding at FY15 year end for beginning balance for FY17. That totaled $27.8 million. So adding this additional $5.3 million, that does have us building an FY18 budget with $33 million in one-time funding. But we really feel that this is a responsible way to help us close this budget gap, right? And one that we'll be able to continue to address and continue to reduce that budgeted beginning balance, that use of one-time funding as we move forward through future fiscal years. So in the event that we do use that one-time funding set aside at third quarter, that leaves us with a gap of $4.1 million. So at our last work session, to address that gap, we had given 3 options. We had discussed eliminating the late buses at high schools, reducing substitute pay to the market average in this region, and then charging the cost of the living wage to the Food and Nutrition Services Fund. So at that meeting, one of the things that we heard was that there wasn't support in terms of changing the late buses at high schools. So on slide 6, we're presenting other potential options for the board to consider. Now, as we move forward, developing our agenda for the approved budget adoption, the budget chair and vice chair will work to ensure that we have consensus. But the recommendations that we're putting forward as other possible alternatives, instead of adjusting or eliminating the high school late bus, is first to increase our parking fees. We currently charge students $200 for parking, and this recommendation would increase that parking fee to $300, which would generate an additional $0.5 million in revenue. So just as some background history, the student parking fee of $100 was initiated in 1992 at that point in time to provide revenue to partially offset a decrease in funding that we received from the state as well as the county. Then that fee was increased to $150 in 2003, and then the last adjustment that was made to that fee was in 2010 when we increased the fee to $200. We do, with Loudoun County, have the highest parking fee in the region, which has been a question before previously. Loudoun did increase their fee last year from $25 to $200. The next adjustment that we're recommending is community use. I know this has been a suggestion that we've received from many board members. It was also high on the budget task force's list. But revenue from community use, we increased that by $200,000 as part of the proposed budget for FY17. And this would increase that funding by an additional $0.2 million. Those two adjustments would take into account two different things, looking at our actual trends of community use revenue, what we're actually receiving as compared to what's budgeted, and then also looking at increasing the fee that we charge for custodial services, right? We would adjust the portion, that current fee is $32, we would increase it to $34. We would also then keep that funding centrally to help us balance the budget versus passing it on to schools. That seemed like the best way to increase community use revenue because it does impact all of the people that use our facilities for community use. And then on the slide, based on the feedback from the previous work session, we have left substitute pay as a potential option as well as moving the living wage. So these are just some other options in terms of balancing the budget for FY17.
Okay, questions? Ms. McLaughlin?
Ms. Michael saw my facial reaction as I furiously started writing notes on my piece of paper. My colleagues, I strongly encourage you to speak up tonight about the student parking fees. We've gone from a recommendation of, removing late bus fees that in fact impact students very substantially in terms of academic learning and achievement. And now it's been shifted to $500,000 on parking fees. We are among the highest in the region. I asked a budget question on this and was so surprised to see how Montgomery County, Prince George's County charge almost nothing. This, I believe, will have very strong parental and student backlash. I think it sends the wrong message. This is not where we find cost savings, is putting parking fees onto our families. I already would like to look for a way to eliminate them. As my understanding, when these students drive themselves, it means we don't have to put them on a bus. We don't have to pay to transport them. And instead, we save money by them driving themselves, and then we turn around and charge them for this. So I appreciate that staff is looking at different ways, but putting it on the parking fees, it is probably consistently one of the things. And Ben Press, I hope you're going to speak to opinions on the student parking fees. But I was just saying that we're not only highest in the region, but this is something that I really do hear from our families. This absolutely, please, everybody, if you haven't asked your students about these parking fees, I encourage you to check with your families, but I don't think this is going to speak well to us as a board or as a school system that we have one of the smallest budget gaps that we've faced in a long time, and putting $500,000 on the taxpayers and our families on a fee that we shouldn't even be charging in the first place is very problematic.
Okay, we do provide bus transportation to everybody. Okay, Beth?
No, Ms. Strauss?
No, that's
No,
fine.
no. Because you said that, I'm not sure you heard me.
Yes, I did.
If they don't drive themselves, they'll cost us money because we're going to have to put them on a bus. We do our buses based on occupancy. The fact that these kids drive themselves can often mean that we're not going to have to pay to put them on a bus. So it can be a cost savings.
Mr. Press?
Thank you. I guess I walked in at a good time. Appreciate your comments there. This is one I do hear pretty frequently about. I will announce that I cannot support that item. The main reason being that I think that this is might be perceived as by students as this board trying to, the optics of it might come off as this board's trying to balance the budgets on the back of students, which is not something that I, in good faith, could support. What I will say is, while I understand the argument, we do provide transportation and whatnot, but for a lot of students, those extracurricular activities are only accessible if they've got access to a vehicle on school. With us providing late buses 1 day a week only, they're not going to have access to transportation to school in some cases, and from home from school in a lot more. So I have concerns about that item. What I will bring back is, and I don't know if there has been previous discussion, I apologize for being out of the room, on the pupil placement fee, if that has been something that's come up. That is something that, again, as I said in the previous work session on this, is something that is truly a luxury for our families to do, and it is not, we're going to provide you great education wherever you are, and if you want to go somewhere else, I think a fee in that context is not inappropriate, and it's got a greater, the dollar sign next to it than the parking item does. So
May I
would
respond to that?
Yes, please do.
The reason, there's been a number of discussions, there's no easy solution on this. I know that the supervisors are counting on us because of the gap is one of the smallest ones we've had in a long time, is developing a recommendation that has minimal impact in the community. So, I mean, I get what you all are saying about the parking fees. I will tell you about the pupil placement fee. The reason we would prefer not going to that immediately is because this is while parking fees, I get how that's a problem, but there's already a setup and a system for capturing those fees. On the inverse, pupil placement fees, we've never done that before, and we've got a lot we need to work through. I think in the future, whether that's next year, I think we will consider that and should consider pupil placement fees, but we've got a lot to consider. Who do we charge those to? Do we charge them to employees, kids? What about students that are already attending another school? What if they don't pay it? Do we make them go back? So we've got a lot of the details we need to work out around. It's just a lot more complex.
No, and I definitely appreciate that explanation. I simply offer it as perhaps as a
I
substitute.
do appreciate the fact that you offered to substitute, though.
And I just wanted to put that concern out there, so hopefully that contributes to the discussion. Thank you.
Ms. Hines?
Yes, thank you. I guess I was, I'm kind of where Dr. Garza was just mentioning, so maybe I'm not going to add very much, but I sort of feel like there are a lot of different ways that we could skin this cat, right? And there are things I would rather do than what's up there. But I think the challenge that we have is trying to find something that the most people can support so that, we can do this in a way that gets us through this year. We still have lots of things that we can maybe use next year because next year will also be challenging. So I would say just, like for myself, if I have something on here, I'm not all that happy with taking the one-time money, but that means I have to come up with something else, right, to fill that hole. And so, if I want to do that, then I have to shop it around with my board members. And the conversations I've had so far have not been easy. It's not easy to find consensus around anything really. So, but I appreciate staff coming up with something that at least plugs the hole. And as far as the parking fees, I sort of feel like, it provides a disincentive a little bit to raise the parking fees, provides a disincentive for driving, which, we do have too many cars on the road. Maybe it provides an incentive for carpooling. Maybe that's completely idealistic. I don't know. If we are also going to roll out more of the free bus passes for city, county buses, that would probably help, because I think that's the big question that students and parents sometimes have is, well, my student can't leave right at the end of school or has to go to work rather than home. They do need to have transportation, and so we need to think about that.
Mr. Moon?
Some of my colleagues will remember my comments that I made on use of one-time funding from third quarter. That's $5.3 million, which one of the more important budgetary principles that we should not be doing, but we are being sort of forced to do it. And I am willing to go along with using the one-time funding of $5.3 million. Furthermore, I am even at this point want to throw something out for my colleagues' consideration is that with generous decision by County Board of Supervisors and on the transfer to us, and also their desire, not to see minimize the impact on our community members having to come up with their own money to be able to, go to school. I'm trying to address the parking fee increase, or even the community use fee increase. That, as you alluded, Dr. Garza, if you are trying to somehow find a way to survive this year, and then we can address the following the next time. One thing that I want to throw out for my colleagues' consideration is use some of $8 million we have in the reserve and direct the superintendent and make up that shortfall, whether it's just $700,000, whether it's just something less than that, because that's what we are dealing with both $500,000 parking fee increase and $200,000 of community fee. We can use $700,000 out of reserve and at the same time direct the superintendent to find $700,000 to make up the reserve using the year-end surplus.
Okay, so Mr. Moon, if you don't mind my repeating, just make sure I understand.
Go ahead.
Because I haven't heard that suggestion. So
We
have the eight-
sometimes we did that. Sometimes we did that long ago.
it's a new idea. So we do have built into our budget on an annual basis the $8 million of emergency reserve that you know we have available to us should we need to use it. So what I hear you suggesting, Mr. Moon, is that we use $700,000 from that $8 million emergency reserve
And
to keep us from having to increase community use and parking fees to balance the budget. And then we'll move forward into next year looking for some long-term solutions.
And also at the same time, because we want to have that $8 million in the reserve, direct the superintendent find $700,000 out of year-end surplus, so that you have $8 million. Because I believe that we have some money at the year's end, because we always got to have some money at the year's end.
Okay, Ms. Evans.
So I appreciate this, this proposal. I think that the substitute pay, the living wage going into food and nutrition services makes a lot of sense. The community use fees, I'm looking at both parking fees and community use fees. I look back at the budget task force, and Mr. Press, one of the rare occasions when I disagree with you, I have to say, but I do appreciate you bringing that. I very much do. At the same time, the budget task force, both of these were at the very top of what the budget task force brought as possible revenue reducers. I'm sure Mr. Press probably spoke against it at the time. And I look at this and I think, and I understand I don't like fees on our students or on our families. For the students who are paying parking fees, this is less than $2 a day at our schools for parking. And I do think that it's reasonable, particularly considering the fact that students who qualify for free and reduced lunch, those that really truly have to have their cars to get to work right after school, they have waivers. Is it a waiver or is it a reduced fee? And would the reduced fee change at all with this proposal, or would the reduced fees stay the same?
I imagine it would go up slightly because it's a percentage of the overall.
It's a percentage?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Do we know what the fee is now for free and
I'm
reduced
quickly
lunch?
grabbing it.
Okay. So while I would welcome anybody who had better ideas, I appreciate that we were able to take out the removal of the late bus. So that's what I have to say.
Mr. McElveen?
I actually preferred the previous version that we had several weeks ago. I like Mr. Moon's suggestion on the parking fees. I'll say it again. I think when we look at the reduced fee and no fee parking, if you can afford to drive a car to school, you should be paying the full parking fee. And I do hope we look at that. I've asked several times about incorporating that. And that's it.
Ms. Corbett-Sanders?
Thank you. I'm relieved that we are down to this level of what we're trying to find money for. I want to thank you for taking into account my grave concerns over getting rid of after-school buses. As somebody who had to raise a lot of money as a PTA president to include one extra bus at our local high school, and then I decided to go follow a connector bus last week. And I can promise you that the connector bus does not get our children home to where they live from many of our schools. So I am also very concerned about the parking fee. An increase of 50% is significant by all measures. And so I would encourage that we get out our fine point pencils and look at alternative ways of doing it. It doesn't have to be 100% of any one of the categories on the budget task force. Maybe instead of increasing by 50%, we do a slight a modification if we decide to do that at all. But one number that I see here, which had significant support, was the closure of schools in July and have staff report to other school locations, and that reduces utility usage at 0.6, so $600,000. That's pretty significant, and it gets us pretty close to $700,000. Other areas that we might want to look are at perhaps the impact of online classes and whether we have the staffing on that, or a number of other areas. But I would encourage all of my colleagues around the table to look at things that reduce the impact of introducing fees this year. And my reasoning for this is slightly different. We are about to, many of us are encouraging our members of the Board of Supervisors to support putting a meals tax on the referendum. We will also be likely advocating in our communities for that. It's very hard when you go out to that community and you say, well, this year we're going to go ahead and add those fees, and we're going to add these fees and that fees. So I would suggest that if there is a way that we can avoid introducing those fees unless we don't get a diversification of revenues for the county in subsequent years, then we may be forced to do fees.
Okay, Ms. Huff?
Thank you. I do have the parking fee information. Staff Leafin had given it to me, and then I missed it.
Good.
So we charge students eligible for reduced price meals for the full year half of the fee. So they're currently paying $100 of the $200. And students that are eligible for free meals are currently paying 10%, so $20 of the $200. For the full year, correct.
Okay, Ms. Huff?
So I'm trying to wrap my brain around this. We're going to use one-time funding. For as long as I've listened, we were not to use one-time funding. So for whatever reason, it's being recommended that we can use one-time funding. So I guess my question is, if we can use it for $5 million, why aren't we just using it for $9 million? The full amount of 9.3.
Well, we have been using one-time funding in our
For beginning balance.
That's correct.
Got it.
But, it's just how far we think we can go with using one-time money. That's part of the reason why I think we suggested, and it was very unusual for us to suggest at third quarter, not to dedicate that money for something, because we felt like we might need the money in the budget. I think what Mr. Moon was suggesting does get us a little bit more, if that's what you're suggesting, is, so why don't we do more?
Well, actually, I'd say 9.3 minus 1.1, just so it's in the correct fund, but
I think Ms. Huff is referring
it'd
to
be
the
an additional 3.9.
9.4 minus 1.1.
Correct.
Yeah.
So I feel like if we're going against guidance to not use it, but we're doing it, then we might as well go swinging and do it.
And I would say swing with caution.
But we we've already been told to execute with caution and not use one-time
So
funding.
5.3 is what we had available, and we've already identified that one-time funding.
And we know we're
at
going to
the-
identify the rest that we would need at end of year.
We also have other priorities. I think we've already talked about funding with year-end funds. So the other piece is another reason why we recommended the one-time funding is the timing of where our budget cycle is right now. Any reductions to programs and staff is going to be very disruptive going into the next school year. That was one of the other reasons why we recommended using the one-time funding to balance the budget. If we were back in January, I would recommend that we would not use the one-time funding.
Oh, all right. So I'll move on. Okay. So
I might challenge that concept just a teeny bit, because I get what Susan's saying, but I think the challenge is also that if we don't use the 5.3, go through the book, that means we have to start cutting into some student programming. I mean, that's all there is to it.
Well, then
And
I'll
so if,
continue.
no, but what I'm saying is, and I think where we've tried to do that, it's very difficult to get board consensus over what the 5.3. So, I mean, I think it's still an option to the board. If you say let's not use the 5.3, to not use it, but we're going to have to really roll up our sleeves, because we've met with board members and we kind of know, and I know Janie and Tammy have visited with folks. It's going to be really difficult to get consensus around the budget and
Right.
moving forward.
Well, I'll respond to that before I continue. I do know when we were looking at $50 to $75 million, we were saying it looks like we could probably get to 20. So I hear it both ways. And when you met, you said, oh, the most we're getting to is 20. So I think if we don't want to use one-time funding, we should have that real conversation if it's not best practices. So if we decide we're not comfortable, I still think that we have to address the fact that at some point we're rounding. You know, we rounded to zero at some point. We needed 122.7. We received 54.8. We were in the hole by 67.9. We received 16.8 from the state and 33.6 from the county. We rounded some more. We made some adjustments and got to 4.1. 1.1 million, I do think, should be moved over to reflect the correct fund. But I do seriously have a problem with us adding student fees or any fees at this point. It's 0.1% of our budget. Back when I wanted to recognize a savings of 4.4 million to our proposed budget, I was told that it was not an appreciable amount, and I was actually mocked at what a small percentage it was. And I just wanted to recognize dollars, not cut anything. But here we are looking at burdening our community even more. You know, I've asked some of my colleagues why they agree with the increase in the $100 in the parking fee. And the answer I see is if you can afford the car, you can afford the fee. And I don't have a problem with it because over the 10 months, it's $30. But there's a part of the conversations that's missing. I might have been okay with this increase in fee when we were looking at a $75 million shortfall because the Board of Supervisors didn't increase our transfer and didn't increase taxes on the constituents. But at this point, in order to prioritize education, they increased taxes on our students, and another fee is just another revenue source that we're tapping into. I guess my question is, if we're going to increase this fee by $100, and then at the end of the year we have millions of dollars left over, are we going to refund them the $100 because we actually didn't need the revenue? You know, these are things we're going to end up with of a surplus, and we're going to have taken more revenue instead of getting to a point where we say, now it's our turn to find the savings. We've gotten the increase in revenue that we've asked for. I think the same is true for the community use fee. I think that we could potentially be discouraging participation. It could end up biting us and losing revenue in the end. But at some point, I think we need to thank the Board of Supervisors, thank the community, and do some work to find some savings of our own. On the conversation of rounding, I guess one of my questions is, we are recognizing $800,000 as a decrease in expenditure based on student enrollment. So how many students is that equal to?
So this goes back to our conversation about how we cost enrollment growth, right? So we took the spring enrollment projections as well as all the student demographics, and we load those at every individual school. And then we calculate that staffing from the base up from 0. We literally start over, recalculate all of the teachers. What we did is we compared that projected cost, once we generated all the teachers and calculated their cost, we compared that to the cost that we had projected in the proposed budget, right? And the cost savings was 3.8 million, right? So that's the cost savings as compared to our estimate in the proposed budget.
Okay.
Okay.
So the 800,000, but at some point that's less student growth.
So
More than we had projected less student growth a month ago.
So the $800,000, remember, was from the March work session when I had said we hadn't finished calculating that enrollment growth, right? We were working our way through all of the positions. So that was my estimate at that time. Now they are completely finished. We have calculated all of the staffing for every school. We've provided that staffing to HR, and the schools are actually in the process of hiring all those positions. So overall, it was less or more of a savings when we actually finished than I had projected in March.
So again, I mean, I think it's a projection where we're rounding, and it's $800,000, and we're looking at charging people a very significant amount of money to their wallets. And you know, it's not best practice to use one-time money, and I know that we've been careful also on best practice of how much we estimate on state sales tax. We have a few $1 million more we could play with there from the 16.8 versus what they projected to be 21. And again, I know that you're trying to be cautious, but we also have always tried to be cautious with not one-time money. And you know, I just think that if we should be willing to continue to round to this really small piece of our budget, especially in the name of not asking for more revenue, and when people have been quite generous with what we're getting this year. I do have some other suggestions if we want to go there. I mean, I know in my sit-downs, when we talked about things that we can do, raising the floor minimum from 17 and 19 was something that I understood that was something that was possible. I know we talked about assistant principals. I know that there are areas that there was things that I heard in my 2x2 meetings, not more than that, that there were areas that we could come up with. And I don't think we should stop the conversation, especially in the name of adding more, charging people more.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Wilson?
Thank you very much. So I'm gonna get at this a little bit differently, but before I do, I think that I would just like to echo the comments regarding the fees. I would oppose increasing fees. I think we shouldn't be presumptuous about individual families in connection with their cars and their ability to pay. I think that is, for me, definitely goes a step too far. I also, frankly, don't favor reducing the substitute pay. I mean, they're critical teachers in our system, and I'm not in favor of reducing their probably somewhat small daily pay. This is an operational decision. If we think we can get as many substitutes as we need to and as good a quality without affecting the morale of teachers, I don't know that I'm dead set against it, but it doesn't sound like a good idea to me. I do think the last point, the living wage charge to the Food and Nutrition Services Fund, that has always made sense to me, and it makes sense to me tonight. So I guess for me, a $2.7 billion operating budget, I assume that there's caution in the preparation of that budget. In other words, it's not a budget that is, right up to the 99.99% of what we expect to spend. That there must be some cushion in that budget, in the budget projections. You know, I think we have an example from our earlier session of something that, you know, we didn't have to do, right? We want to do technology innovation. And so I guess for me, since if you net out 1.1 million, you're left with $3 million, which, if my math is correct, and it may not be, numbers and I don't always cooperate, but I think we're talking 1/10 of 1% of the operating budget. It seems to me that we can sharpen our pencils, and I don't know how to do it. Maybe if there's allocation of funds to school, across various schools, talking to principals and saying, hey, we don't want to cut anything, but we need you to sharpen your pencils. We need to change and reduce the amount of buffer we had in the budget to be cautious, to account for $3 million, which is 1/10 of 1% of the overall operating budget. And I guess I would go about it that way. I think from the community standpoint, people have had to tighten their belts. And that's not a stunning amount of money in terms of 1/10 of 1%. If you said, hey, next year you have to spend 1/10 of 1% less in your budget. Many, many, many families in this community have done far more. They've cut far more in their personal lives. So I think that we need as a board to be willing to say, we can do this and keep everything. Keep it the way it is. That's my viewpoint.
Thank you. Ms. Palchik?
Thank you. I guess I just wanted to know, have we studied or do we know the impact that the reducing the substitute pay would have on our pool of qualified substitute teachers?
Yes, so the recommendation would be to reduce the substitute rates to the market average in the region. Right, we have discussed this in terms of other stakeholders, and it did continue to come up as a highly recommended item, but we would monitor the impact as we work through the next year in terms of our ability to recruit subs.
If I'm correct, it's mostly the retired teachers who are coming back.
So the impact to market rate, where we are over in terms of our market rate, is we do pay substitutes a higher rate, and the only other larger jurisdiction to do that in Virginia is Prince William. Conversely, though, we do have some other districts that pay a below college degree rate that we didn't factor in. So I would say that the averages that we're recommending was $14.23 for a short-term sub and just over $20 for a long-term sub. Are within those ranges in the region, right? And the place where we would see the biggest reduction is in our retired teachers who come back to sub.
Sorry, what? Right. But so I just want to be clear. So most likely it'll be just that group of the retired teachers. It's possible we will not have as many retired teachers substituting. That could be an impact.
I think you know, it was great practice. And I think it certainly encouraged retired teachers to come back to the classroom because you have confidence, then you have a skilled teacher. But in the scheme of things, yeah, we've cut, you know, year after year after year, and we got down to this list. And we continue to ask principals about how they felt like this would impact their ability to staff classrooms. And they felt like it was that they would still be able to, you know, to the extent we still have problems getting substitutes, obviously, everyone does. And so if it were a perfect world, we wouldn't touch this. But I think all in all, our principals felt like this was something that we could tolerate.
Okay, Ms. Schultz?
So I'm not going to vote for any budget that raises any fee on any family, period, end of story. I'll say that up front. Our supervisors have passed on a substantial tax increase to many homeowners who have not seen family wages increase, if not decrease, year after year. And the assignation to any one student to assume that if you're driving a car, you can afford to pay more and 50% more or just take the bus. Our later start times, have seriously impacted. A lot of kids get out of school at 3:05 and they got to be at work at 3:30. They don't have time to take a bus. And, they're working to pay for college, not working to pay for more fees. And both the parking fees and the community use fees are paid by families. Community use fee is paid by, families signing up for basketball camp and Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts and church and all kinds of things. So right there, it's a no-go, because that isn't actually us saving money. That's just finding a way for somebody else to pay our bill. So I'd rather us be in a position of saying, you know what, all administrative offices are cleaned one less day a week, and we're going to take the very smallest classrooms in the county that have tiny numbers of students to teacher ratio, and we're going to bump it up, and we're going to close the gap ourselves. We're going to do the work in-house. That's us saving the money instead of just passing on the fees to somebody else. I'm betwixt and between on the substitute pay, because I've heard from members of the community who are substitute teachers who feel, and I don't know if they're someplace on a scale where they're not being paid well, but the argument that somebody who's a retired teacher might not come back if we don't pay them enough, I'm like, I'm sorry, but we're already paying you retirement. So I think that could potentially be reasonable. I mean, that sounds to me like it is reasonable, especially if the principals have said, listen, we think that we have enough of a substitute role. So to me, that's a prudent measure. That's where if somebody's saying, look, we're kind of overpaying and we're pretty sure that there's enough of a supply that with this, with the demand that we have, this is what we could pay. And then, of course, the living wage being charged appropriately to the right service. So we're down to $700,000 from what I can see, and $700,000, if we can't find $700,000 in-house, and no, I have offered time and again over budget seasons to take things from the $8 million reserve, and people acted as if, I had asked for, them to sever their right arm to do things like, pre-K classrooms and more guidance counselors and school psychiatrists. I mean, school psychologists. And that was absolutely no-go. That is the rainy day fund. We can't touch it. So if it was not a good reason then to do it for academic needs, I'm certainly not going to do it for this. So there's got to be another way. It's like back to the drawing board. We have time, and it's $700,000. God bless us that it's $700,000 and not $7 million.
Amen to that. So Ms. Strauss and Ms.
Yes.
Dearnett Koufax, it's very clear, I think.
Yes, I was
we're
going to ask for a
hearing
show of hands on
just,
the fees.
yeah, it looks like, the community use fees, any kind of fees are DOA, right?
Yeah, that's
So we'll go back
what
to
I'm hearing.
We'll go back to the drawing board on that.
Yeah.
I would like a show of hands.
Okay, yeah, I would like to see, and I'll do it in the negative, people who would prefer no fees, or at least not the fees that are here, in other words.
Well, could we have more conversation? Because I think
Okay, all right, we'll wait because we still have Ms. Hines, Ms. Evans. Okay, but at the end, yes, and Megan, if I start to hear a theme, I would like to test the waters so that we're not asking everybody the same questions all over again. So, Ms. Hines.
Well, sorry. I guess my question to that is, what are we going to do instead, right? I mean,
Mr. Moon has a suggestion on the table.
so
Yeah.
which is that we take money out of the $8 million and then figure, well, I need more information about how
Sure.
that works, because it's also something we've always said we can't do. So
I
don't
know.
why it's okay all of a
It's
sudden. But
the emergency piece. We can go back to that. Okay, Ms. Evans?
so. I too am hearing that people don't like these fees. I mean, nobody likes fees. I wanted to go pick up on what Mrs. Corbett Sanders said, and going to the school closures in July, that's $0.6 million. That would appear to be it would be energy savings. We would so that would get us nearly there.
So because we haven't planned for this summer and told other organizations, camps, and other things that they can't use our buildings, we wouldn't be able to shut this summer. So those savings are based on utility savings. So when we originally costed that, we said we would, turn down the utilities and basically make those employees work elsewhere. Well, because we've already developed our summer grid of all the camp programs and other things in our schools, right, to change that at this point, I think would be tremendously disruptive to all of those people that use our buildings.
And it's a lot of county programs. So if we were to make that decision at some point to do that, we would probably need to know by January, something like that, if we're going to do that. I know that's frustrating to some folks. I'm reading a lot of the body language. I mean, that's just the reality. We're just stating the reality
You're
that
gonna
these
read it,
programs, right? These
I think
programs
we
are already
have-
scheduled for the summer.
And we have to remember, when the task force put their recommendation together, it was last fall. Many months have passed, so, each of the items on that recommendations are going to have different impacts at this point in time.
Well, I guess if that's not the, what we can do, I think it would be great if we can accommodate people who feel strongly about fees, and so if we can find something else in this list of things we've identified. I will say, I am not going to go for a budget that approves the increase from 17 to 19 because it affects 23 schools hard, very hard. So that's not on my agenda.
Right, and you're referring to class size. Okay, I have, yes. And then
Okay,
Ms. McLaughlin.
so when we started this, and as little as 6 weeks ago, I was asked to look at the budget task force recommendations and make recommendations of what I could live with and what I couldn't live with. You're now saying that these are OBE, overcome by events, and that, I'm sorry. And so would it be possible for you all to go back through the budget task force list and say, okay, taking into account that there is, I don't think, any stomach for the elimination of our late buses for high school, and less of a stomach for the parking fees, or less of a stomach for the community use, and even less for the parking fees. Is that a way of capturing it? So if you all could tell us, because I've gone through and I've got lists and I've made recommendations and I've been told, oh no, that doesn't apply anymore. So rather than us doing it in that circular manner, if you could tell us where you could find $700,000 taking into the guidance that people aren't comfortable with the elimination of late buses or the increase of 50%.
I mean, I think we could probably certainly go through the list and provide Janie and Tammy maybe some other ways. I mean, that's what we're trying to do here.
Right.
We already did it. We kind of did our first version.
Then we did a second version.
The one that was shared with you all that Monday, I wasn't here. And so we're trying again. So we'll keep trying. I mean, we're hearing what you're saying. So we can certainly come back with some suggestions on how to overcome the 700,000.
Okay, Megan,
I
and
think
then
that's what you're asking, right, Karen?
Okay, Megan, and then Jeanette, and then I would like to get a sense on the fee thing, just so that I'm getting people's guidance. Ms. McLaughlin?
So I think I want to echo one of the most important points that I've been hearing some people point to. Mr. Wilson, I especially heard you saying, we're talking about probably 1/5 of 1% is what Sharon Bulova kept quoting us last year, that $7.5 million was. So wherever the tightness of it, we're not even talking about 1%, and probably not even 1/5 of 1%. So what I'm really struggling with is everyone saying, okay, well, where would we find the money? So my first point is when the task force came up with this notion that we could do an energy savings of 600,000. At no point was the task force told you can't put that on there, because by the time the school board will vote in May and make a decision on how they're going to find cost savings, we won't have enough time for that. So it's concerning to me that as we, as board members and the task force had something on the list, it was identified. At no point did staff tell anyone starting in the fall that one actually looks nice and pretty, but don't ever think about it because by the time you vote in May, it's not feasible for us to do it. So one thought I have is either where are the county programs going to be, and those are the ones we're going to keep open, and the ones that don't have a county program, they'll close, and there's your energy. There you can find energy savings. We've got 200 buildings, but it's very, very concerning to me, and I gotta say, it doesn't look good that we led a task force to believe that they genuinely brought a cost savings to you guys, and now you're telling us we'd never be able to have voted for it anyway.
I think when we were developing the items on the task force list, every one of these items, right, is implementable, but they all have different impacts as to when we make those decisions. So even as we look at the things that impact hiring for all the schools that have already hired, right, if we go out now and say we need to change whatever that program is, right, it impacts the people that we've hired. So I would say everything on this list really has a point in which it really impacts, our students, our employees, the community.
Well, I know time is precious, so I'll talk offline, but I got to tell you, it's really concerning to me having this revelation because it begs to question that list. So to my colleagues, number one, I fully support what Mr. Moon has said at minimum. I mean, if everyone is having such a hard time looking at not just the task force list, but the things we've known over time that we can talk about where we can find savings, then at minimum, when our homeowners and all of our families are going to be looking at higher property taxes because the supervisors wanted to make sure that we had funding for teacher salaries and class sizes and protecting FCPS, if we can't find 1/5 of 1% without taxing people more, that's just wrong. But what I don't understand is why aren't we looking at the fact that it was suggested instructional coaches, which I don't know if anybody's been asking the question as much as I've been, but we've got 22 instructional coaches that are funded by Gatehouse. But then we apparently have another 50 to 70 of them floating around, paid for by individual principals. We have almost 200 schools. If you do the math, it means there's about 100 schools or more that don't have an instructional coach. If we can't afford to have instructional coaches in every building, then there's an equity issue. Does your principal trade in positions? Does your principal save up money and buy one? Whatever the question is, we don't have instructional coaches in every building. And I think there's some other positions in there. Maybe it's a test coordinator. I mean, there are people in our buildings, but the bottom line is instructional coaches aren't necessarily about people losing their jobs. It's the fact that we're always trying to fund a staffing reserve. We're always trying to lower class size. And if we need to return instructional coaches back into the classroom, and I'm not even saying eliminate all instructional coaches, but we're funding 22 of them at the tune of, I think it was $1.9 million. So it's on the list. If we weren't going to do it when we had a $50 to a $75 million gap, now we're looking at 9, and no one wants to find that. And so we're looking at using the $5 million, which, again, are we talking year end? $5 million is considered the year-end savings.
It was third quarter.
This $5
Third
million
quarter,
was
right.
the 5.3
Right.
available
So-
at third quarter.
Right, exactly. So one-time spending, and this is now my 5th budget as a school board member, and that was always considered taboo. And then I'm hearing colleagues say, well, it's too hard to find consensus. Tell that to the board of supervisors. They have to do the work too every year to talk with 10 of them. I'm really troubled that I'm not seeing this board with the number of work sessions we still have available to us, that people really want to help Dr. Garza try and find consensus. Instead, I'm hearing people say, staff, good luck with it. You had 2x2 meetings. Well, guess what? It's not 2x2. There's 12 of us sitting around this table, and for once, we owe it to Dr. Garza, we owe it to her team to do some strategic thinking around this, and defaulting and making them have to guess and figure it out looks really badly on us. But the other thing that I was looking at is it was suggested finding 1% 1% in savings in the departments within Gatehouse, and there's another 1.7 million. So $3.6 million is there if people are saying, how do you not negatively affect students and teachers? Something has to give, and this notion that we just are defaulting on this. You guys, we were elected to do this. It's probably one of the most important things we do. And I really am worried that I'm not seeing people want to engage in this work. We've spent all year talking about it. So, Pat, I know you're upset with me and you're shaking your head, but why isn't anybody wanting to find less than 1/5 of 1%? That's all it is.
Okay, Dr. Garza has a comment, and I'll go back to Mr. Moon.
I don't want to stop the conversation, but I was going to suggest, in the interest of time, because it's 10 o'clock, if we do have another work session on Monday, if everyone came with their ideas. I mean, we know what the challenge is, right? Now, it's this picture, how do we fill in the blanks? And if you want to share your ideas before Monday with Tammy and Jamie.
Sure, and then we can bring them back.
So I was just going to suggest how we kind of keep moving.
Right, moving on. Mr. Moon.
I'm really enjoying this debate among my colleagues over $700,000, not $75 million.
Yes, much better.
That I want to, to a certain extent, I want to echo what Mrs. McLaughlin was trying to say is staff has done their due diligence and their job. Now we are at a point where it's incumbent upon board members to make suggestions, come up with proposals, etc. One that I threw out, I'm gonna think a little further, a little more about that. But there was a suggestion to meet that gap. So every one of us, 12 of us, owe a duty to each other, rather than just asking staff to do that. We gotta do something. So come up with something by Monday to meet whatever, whether it's $9 million, $10 million, or $700,000. And I express my sentiment, and I also see where the board members don't want to go with the raising fees. I was looking at, community use fee a little more with the information provided by colleagues sitting next to me. That there seems to be about 4% increase over our FY15 revenue, which is close to $5 million, and about out of the $5 million, it seems to be about 30% of that is personnel cost. If our personnel cost is gonna go up, and our general principle for a community use is break even, basically, because we want to provide the community opportunity to use our facilities. At the time, we're not in a business of making profits, but also we want to be fair to ourselves in educating our kids. So that is why we charge fees. If the personnel cost is going to go up, if a utility is going to go up, then I think it is reasonable to ask a slight increase. That $200,000, if you're $200,000, it's a 4% increase. That could be considered reasonable. The other 50% increase in parking fee, that's a drastic increase in my mind. So probably, I will not be able to support that at this point. The $500,000, that's a rounding error from all of these. And many, many, many years ago, we used to simply direct the superintendent to find the $500,000 somewhere, put it in just placeholder, and then give the job to superintendent, and we pass the budget. I could ask superintendent to do that as an amendment, or I could simply do what I did was use a part of reserve, which is basically reducing the amount of reserve by that much, and then find the money from year end and just make it whole. So I want to ask board members, spend next several days talking with each other, come up with some money by Monday, and Madam Budget Chair, that again we are talking about. It sounds like a $700,000. Looking at the calendar, budget calendar. When we developed this budget calendar, I know that we are just trying to follow a traditional budget calendar. I really wonder whether we need May 19th budget work session. if it is again $700,000, Monday work session might suffice.
Let's wait, let's see
yeah,
if we
that
can
is,
finish our work.
I
then
want,
we
I want,
are done.
a budget chair to consider
Certainly.
that, depending on the conversation on Monday, even
Right.
not holding the work session on
Right.
19th. Thank you.
Okay, I have a couple of questions to ask first on, first of all, I need to just, so that I'm hearing everybody, with a show of hands, how many people are troubled by asking for fees as a way to solve this? A show of hands. How many people? Well, fees as are presented tonight. Okay.
Well,
1, 2, 3.
That's what I was
Okay,
going to
wait,
say.
wait. Yeah, hold on a minute. I just need to see this generally. 1,
Okay.
2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So fees are a problem. We just need to know that. That's fine. The other question that I have on community use, it's my understanding that I heard you, Mr. Moon, since we are raising employee pay, which would include the employees who maintain our schools for community use, then your thinking is justification for a certain amount of fee increase to cover basically the pay for the custodians. Then my other question to staff is I believe that community use fees have actually never covered the cost of community use. We continue to subsidize to the community as well, we should, and you probably can't find it very quickly as to how much we are basically in deficit on community use.
It's been a long time since we looked at that question, but I know the last time we calculated it, it was, the fees were
4
only
million.
covering a portion of
Yeah.
the cost.
We were basically subsidizing community use to the tune of about $4 million. So, yeah.
Ilyon and I were going through it. What the minimal increase in the community use, it actually pretty much covers the increase in the salaries of the
exactly.
custodians, plus a modest increase in the cost of providing benefits.
Right.
And so you're actually, this is almost a keep whole
Right.
recommendation.
Right, so you can keep that in mind. All right, so what I'm hearing is there's a question about the parking fees. I get that. We can continue to think about the community use if you want. Anyway, so we will have another opportunity to discuss this on Monday. And we also have Mr. Moon's suggestion is to, in the short term, take the rest of the balance out of the reserve and then replenish that, which we really need to do out of other funds in August, September, October, because we really do need to keep that reserve. So that's Mr. Moon's suggestion for how to get around this. Ms. Hoff?
I also suggested rounding.
Yes, well, although it is, I know that always sounds like kind of an easy way, but we really do have to, rounding is good. We are accountants here, we have to do this right. So, are there any other questions this evening? Everybody looks a little bleary-eyed. All right, we have come to some consensus. We've made some progress, so thank you all very much for your patience. And we shall return to this once more, and perhaps we will solve it in a week. Thank you very much.
I know. Services and call it a day.
And then they can find money later on.